except we don't have, a result of gravitational pull. So it's the same kind of atmosphere we have here, about 80% nitrogen, 20% oxygen. We have air conditioning, we can make the temperature whatever we want. The only thing is, you lack gravity, and that makes a lot of difference when we're talking about some of that. One thing I think is kind of interesting is you think over what a short period of time that, humans have been alive, and in really, in the lifespan of just one individual, we went from, and one of my grandmother, in fact, she was born before the Wright brothers flew. And imagine in her lifetime, she got to see her grandson be an astronaut. I mean, nobody had even flown when she was a girl. She never ever flew in an airplane her entire life. But yet her son was a fighter pilot and her grandson was an astronaut. I mean, that's kind of amazing, when, she had never done that, or my other grandparents either. But it's just in a short period of time how much has taken place. This gives you an idea of size of how things have changed. When we first started flying, the Mercury castle was very small. This is all the scale. Then we went to Gemini. Gemini, same general shape, but you would have two people in it. Now, I asked this morning, and I guess I was surprised. I thought many of the younger people would know that. But I said, do you know what a phone booth is? Because anymore, I haven't seen a phone booth in the wild in a long time. But in the Gemini, the phone booth, the volume of a phone booth is bigger than the Gemini capsule. So guys were in there for like 11 days, 10 days, in less than a phone booth. So it gives you an idea how cramped that was when they did these missions. And when you talk to the guys that did it, like Lovell and Borman did one of the longest ones, and I was talking to them, they said, I would never want to do that flight again. It was terrible, because you're in a seat. Now you're weightless, so you're not getting like bed sores, but you're in a seat. You can't really move much, and you're there for like 12 days. So, I mean, they had it really tough, much more than we did later. Here the Apollo is bigger, still not large. And then the shuttle, while it's as big as like a DC-9, if the overall the length and the wingspan, however, the part you actually operate and live in, it's pressurized normally, is just the front, and it's quite small. It's not very large at all. And then if you have a space lab, I flew a space lab that was full length, then you could go through a little tunnel, and that was much larger. But still, somewhat cramped for as long as you're there. If you look at it nowadays, this is space station shot of it. Here you see the shuttle dock at the top. It's about 100 yards from one side to the other. So it's quite large. I don't know if anybody's ever watched it. You can just put in your, Google, when's the space station coming over, and it'll tell you when it comes over. And I advise you, it's usually about an hour before, after sunset, an hour before sunrise, you'll see it, because you see the sun reflecting off it. But it's pretty impressive. It's pretty light, really lights up a lot. You can watch it go by. You have a chance to see. Now the shuttle's a little different. Shuttle was kind of interesting design. We have this big orange tank, which has both liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen in it. And they're combined in this really, very clean propellant. This smoke, it's not really smoke that comes like that, it's just water vapor. You're burning hydrogen and oxygen, you get water vapor. But that only gives you about 1.3 million pounds of thrust. On the side, these give you about almost 3 million pounds of thrust per piece of these solids. They only burn for about 2 minutes, so that helps you get going and get out of the thicker part of the atmosphere. And then the rest of the next 6 minutes, you're just running strictly on the other engine, so you don't accelerate quite as fast initially. So here you see it rolling out, and we have this crawler. This crawler is like they used on Apollo. They would put the Saturn V on it, and they go all the way from the vehicle assembly building out to the pad. It only goes about 1 mile an hour, and the structure is so flexible. If you ride out on it, I've done it on it, right by the tail will move back and forth maybe 4 or 5 inches each way, just because the whole system flexes that much. And then when it goes up the hill here, it has to get up to the pad. So you see it going up the hill, it jacks itself up to keep the pad level all the way up, and then it fits on these jack stands right here, and then it sits down hard. And that way they can work on it back in the vehicle assembly building, they can bring it out, and that's how all the rockets will recently. This is a crew patch. This is my second mission, and there's often a little symbology. When you do these patches, they have to improve. So they always ask you, well, what's the meaning behind it? And sometimes there's no meaning. I'll show you one meaning. But in this one, unfortunately, one of the guys who was one of the scientists that was going to fly with us, he was only going to fly one mission, Bob Phillips, was really a great guy, but he developed an arrhythmia, cardiac arrhythmia, like 5 months before the flight. So he had to get pulled off, so his name came off the patch. So what we did was, we put these 7 stars like a P. Now we couldn't say that because you're not allowed to put an initial of anybody that's not flying. So we said that was just 7 stars that represented 7 people on the mission. But in fact, it was a tip of the hat to Bob Phillips because he didn't get to fly. On the other hand, we look at this one. This is my first mission. And they said, what does this mean? We go, it doesn't mean anything. We just don't look good. But one of the guys had to write a little thing up, and he said, oh, it means the shuttle's going forward into the future, and some baloney, I don't know what. And they said, okay, that's good. So what I'd like to do now is I'm going to show you a little video and show you what happens during a mission and talk about it a little bit, and then we'll talk about a couple other things, and then we'll ask some questions. So before we start, so I can get ahead, right? This is the orbiter. Our airplane part is the orbiter. The entire assembly of everything is called the shuttle. So you have the orbiter is attached to the orange tank, in 3 places, and then the solid rocket boosters are attached in 2 places to there, and then the whole thing is attached to this plate here by 4 bolts that stick up through the pad on the solid rocket boosters. And when you launch, they have little explosive cutters that cut. These nuts are about that big around. They just shear through them and cut them so you come off the pad. But even if you didn't, it's pulling so hard, it'll pull it out of the pad if it doesn't. And usually you get some of these bookends. Like I said, bookends, some of those nuts, they're about 10 pounds a piece. And they give them to you afterwards as a souvenir. So here we go. So now watch what happens. So you'll see they're starting to, you see some water coming out here. Now they're going to light this engine. There it goes. It has to start 7 seconds before we lift off. It takes up, it's the full speed. And then when they're full speed, the white rockets launch and you're on your way. So suddenly you go from a dead stop and you're pulling 2 Gs. You weigh twice as much as you did before, instantaneously. So you're lying on your back. You can reach things, but it's harder. When you go to reach switches over your head, you can't just do it by feel because your proprioceptive, where you think it is, isn't there. It's going to be back behind. So you really have to make sure you watch your hands touch switches, not just reach where you think it is. So we get going, and for the first 2 minutes and 13 seconds, it varies a little bit. We're 2 Gs, and we're heading uphill. We get to about 170,000 feet. And at that point, we're through most of the thick part of the atmosphere, and the white solid rocket boosters run out of fuel, and they come off. And then we motor along with just the liquid fuel rockets in the back for another 6 minutes. And then as we get lighter and lighter, as we burn fuel, F equals MA, and it goes down, same thrust, we get up to 3 Gs. So we weigh 3 times as much as usual. It's very noisy. You're wearing earmuffs. It's like over 130 decibels in the cabin. But you're wearing earmuffs. You get up, and next thing you know, you're on orbit. Here you see about 20 minutes later, we're passing over the south part of India, Sri Lanka, and you can see the whiter clouds. And you can see out here, you see the curvature. Just that little blue. We have better pictures later. That's the atmosphere. As soon as you get on orbit, some of the guys will get out of their suits. They still have their long underwear on, and they're going through the checklist, getting everything running. You have to load new other programs on the computer. Our computers only have 98K of memory. K. Okay? We had a big upgrade in 1990, and we got up to 118K. That's as much as we ever had. We can talk about later if you want. I already changed, and my job was to get open the payload bay doors because we have to get rid of the waste heat from the computers and just our own metabolic heat outside by radiation. There's no air, so you actually have to radiate it, the black body stays. If you don't open the payload bay doors, you'll overheat and you have to come back at first orbit. So then we had to launch this satellite about 6 hours in. This is the one that goes up to geosynchronous, and this is not slow motion. This is real motion. It weighs about 32,000 pounds. It just has 6 kicker springs that comes out, and it just goes about 1 foot a second is how fast it's going. And it just comes out and goes up over your head, and you back off about 120 miles or so, and then they'll send a signal from the ground that lights that rocket, and then it heads up the geosynchronous orbit, which is like 22,300 miles up. We're over the Pacific Ocean here. You can see the various clouds over the Pacific Ocean. And once again, you can see the blue of our atmosphere that we all live in is just this little thin band. Now, we do different experiments. Has anybody ever had rock candy? You know what I'm talking about? It has a facet like it's a jewel. But they're different crystals. And what happens is in one gravity, you have convection. So the crystals get oriented in different ways. If you're in 0 G, they form one straight crystal. So then with X-ray crystallography, you can actually look at the shadow of the molecules to understand how it's built sterically, so you can design pharmaceuticals to fit exactly in. So not just the chemical reaction, but you know how it fits. So we did stuff like that, and they've been doing it ever since. And mainly used by the pharmaceutical company, design drugs. They don't have to do trial and error. They can actually see that. You can't really do that as well here on Earth. Another one we had was, a plant growth experiment. That's what I'm taking data on. And if you remember in biology, they talk about geotropism, right? The roots know to grow down. Well, there's no result gravity, so who knows where down is. The roots grow all over the place, and some plants stop growing. So if you wanted to use plants, for the leaves to scrub CO2 out of the air or to eat them, they stop growing, many of them. So you really have to know, that's something you only can try by being in a microgravity environment to find out. So things that we thought we'd do, we can't quite do that right. Now I was the principal investigator for this, and I'm doing ultrasounds, first time this was done, of looking at the middle cerebral artery blood flow to see how that changed, and if they were sick or not. And we showed a difference between how they vasoregulated, there you go. So we're doing that, and we show that, I want to show this the blood flow in the commander, that he did have blood flow in his brain. So that's why it's a movie. But here you see that's the conductive gel, and he's doing it around now. On the same mission, I treated the first successful treatment of space motion sickness, which he's doing ever since. Here they're looking at CVP. Look at central venous pressure here. He's blowing in a mouthpiece, and his airway pressure, when it equals his venous pressure, you get no flow. And it's very accurate. It's a very good non-invasive way to get accurate central venous pressure monitoring. So we did that on this mission as well. The next thing you see is we're looking at intraocular pressure. Like people have glaucoma, they worry about the pressure being too much. Well, here you're not supposed to do this to yourself. Not to say you can't, and I did it to myself. So the big thing is, since your cornea is anesthetized as you push, you don't know you're pushing. You see your vision gets really blurry as you're indenting your cornea, but you still can get good measurements. And your intraocular pressure is up about 25% when you're in orbit. We now see on long duration spaceflight that actually causes permanent down. Here we had an incubator. It was a student experiment. It had 18 eggs in it. There was a control group of 18 eggs. All of them were fertilized several hours before we launched. But then these are on orbit, so they're in 0G early on. All the eggs that went to orbit stopped developing at that point. So it shows without gravity, in the early phases of cell division, they stop. So if you think about having families in space and all, you might have to put the woman in a centrifuge for a while. But otherwise, it could be a method of birth control, I suppose. But it would be expensive for that. But it really is the thing, if you're going to raise animals or others, we've done it with other species, reptiles, amphibians. This does not work. There's an issue, and they don't quite understand that. You can't really duplicate that on Earth. Here that we were seeing what would happen if we had to realign our inertial system, and he's using a thing like a sector that he's taking a sunshot to see if we lost contact with the ground, could we get our nav system to work again to come back. This is a IMAX film camera. If anybody's seen the IMAX, it's a 70 millimeter film, and we filmed the Blue Planet on this mission. And that cassette, we have to load them by hand. That one cassette is 2 minutes of film. So it was a lot of work to do that, to shoot those. But I show this because we took a lot looking back at the Earth. And if you ever see the Blue Planet, is really good at what it looks like to see the planet. It's not very dramatic like some of the others, but actually it's like being there. It is really a good view. And you can see quite a bit. So I'll show you some of the sights you see. The human eye is unbelievable. Here you see, we're down over Cuba looking to the north. Here's the peninsula of Florida. Okay? You see where the water's shallower here. Here's down in the Bahamas. You see clouds up here where the Cape Hatteras up to New York. You can see that all in one view much more clearly with your own eye. And then you'll see in a moment, we had stills as well, because you could see fault lines that had not been noticed before. You would see when you're looking for it. Now look at this. Here's Cuba. Notice where the clouds are, mostly over the island, even this peninsula. So the ancient mariners do that too, because the land has a lower specific heat. It heats up faster than the water. So the air rises, right? Hot air rises, it condenses, and it gives you clouds. Ancient mariners, when they looked for landfall, they didn't know where they looked for the puffy clouds. And that's where they go. They didn't have the advantage of looking from orbit and seeing that, but they understood that. So people hundreds of years ago were very observant, did a lot of really good things without the kind of scientific technology we have today. There's a big mapping camera, large format mapping camera the geologists have us carry. And this is where we were seeing fault lines they hadn't seen before. We saw some places where civilization in the Amazon basin that had never been discovered in modern times that we could see, taking film to show it. Here is like you see the subduction zone we call Central America. There's a volcano, 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 volcano. Clouds over the land again. And this is where the Pacific plate is running into Central America. And you can see where the fault line is and where the volcanoes are, right there. And one was actually erupting the day before we got that. another shot here in a second. This is just showing the Pacific Ocean. And it just gives you an idea as we get towards the Terminator, like where it's night on this side. You get the feeling of the thunderstorms that they stand out, but they're obviously very low compared to our altitude. This last shot, I think, is one looking from the south, overhead Sri Lanka, looking to the north, and you can see, you'll see the Himalayas. And we're flying upside down. There's the tail right there, right wing down the velocity vector going forward. So we're on our back on this way so we can see the ground. And then here's the Himalayas, and here's the Tibetan High Plateau, not much growing there. Here's the Ganges River Basin, which is very low. And I would usually watch this. We see this right before we would normally go to bed. And then I would usually go to bed, put on a Walkman, and I'd watch the Pacific Ocean, which is kind of boring, and then go to sleep. And that's why the rest of the guys will show in a second how they would sleep. Now, how do we eat? You know, we have both meals ready to eat, MREs, which are really actually pretty good. But Mountain House, camping food, if anybody's used it, they were put in business by NASA. NASA's the one who perfected how to freeze dry food so it tasted okay. So here we select we want hot water or cold water. We put it in, you see them kneading it, to make the water good in there. Otherwise, it's very slow to mix. The stuff stays separated. You put it in a toaster oven, basically. It's a resistive oven. You can't use microwave because there's too much electromagnetic interference with phallic or electronic. Now here, watch. Shot on goal. Boom. Chicken cherry-out. So you see this is saline solution. You can't use salt because it would bounce all over the place. But anything that's moist, you can eat. So split pea soup, you can eat with a spoon. And you can take fruit cocktail and heavy syrup, get it in a tablespoon, and slowly accelerate and get it doing flips, and catch it in your mouth and never drop a piece. You see them passing napkins here. It's kind of easy to pass a napkin. You see them throw a couple across here. But you have to be careful not to be too exuberant in the stuff that doesn't stick together. Over it. Cookies. Don't use granola. Dry granola is granola clouds all over. Nor dunes. M&Ms are pretty good. Here we have sleep restraints. They're not sleeping bags, but it's so you don't move around because there's air for our air conditioning system, and you'll end up on the air return. So if you weren't strapped in, everybody in the ball, all on the return. So if you get into these, it's not for warm. Some guys will wear a sleep mask because you get one sunrise or sunset every 90 minutes. So that bothers some people. I think being in medicine, I was used to sleeping anytime, anywhere. It didn't matter. So I would always sleep with a flight deck looking out the window. They would always go down there and wear see they have their headsets on. They're all sleep masks. Now here's some exercise. I'm doing some push-ups, pull-ups, and I'm not quite going all the way down. So the form isn't great. So Bob Springer, one of my crewmates, is a colonel in the Marines, so he's going to show me how to do it. And you can see his form is much better. And then he does one arms, the kind of and then to make it even worse, he does one finger one. But since we're in 0G, that's really not all that impressive. Now this next one is John Blaha, and he's on a treadmill. That is not slow motion. So here you're on a treadmill. He has bungee cords hanging down. You adjust them to your weight, so it's the same downforce that you have here. But it feels, and that's not slow motion, but it feels like you're pushing a car. That's what it feels like. But it's still good exercise. Here we are. We were waiting to talk to President Bush, and we couldn't reconfigure anything while they were waiting. So the only time we played around was this, and we took Tang, and we're going to try to make an orange mango bubble of Tang coalesce with a grapefruit Tang. Grapefruit Tang is really good for everybody. Actually, it's great. So I was in charge of this one. I'm trying to blow it towards this guy. So it's Jim Buckley, and he just becomes Pac-Man. He just eats it. So I start laughing. And now mine's so large, I have to suck it down little by little. So luckily, one of my crewmates here is getting in the air, drops it, hit the wall. The watch comes off. Here goes one zooming off, so he grabs it. And then there's some hanging off my nose. Not to be outdone, the commander put on a nice clean shirt for the president. His last clean shirt. And this is tropical fruit punch. And if you have kids, you never give your kids a white shirt for tropical fruit punch. Well, he decides he's going to suck it up with his straw, but the surface tension is just round up the side of the straw. It's all over. Watch what happens. So here he goes, and now it's on his fingers. By the time he was done, he had polka dots. And he's going, you think they'll be able to see that when they're down to the president? Now here we have flour tortillas. Ostensibly, we took flour tortillas because they have better aerodynamic. They stay fresh longer, but their aerodynamic properties are better than sliced wheat. So this is the only time we played around this much when we were getting ready to talk to the president. So then, the day before we were going to come in, we were going to land here at Edwards out in the desert. and there was really high winds, so they wanted us to come in right after dawn. So we had to prep our suits the night before, and you can see with nobody in them, they even seem like they have a life of their own. There's no gravity. So here we are, just checking them out, and then we took this is the one of the suits I developed from the escape system, and we still use them today. They'll use them on artists as well. And here you see we're just donning them, and we're trying to show how you can help somebody else do it. I've done it many times, but we pretended like I'd never done it before. And you have to, pull your head through, and there's a big waterproof zipper, so if you have to bail out in the water, it's waterproof. And you see he's turning around and trying to zip it up there. So we're showing people how it works. Do it. This was our last sunset. This is, as we're coming over Australia, we do our reentry burn, and we only slow up. We're going about 25,600 feet a second. We slow up about 300 feet a second, that's all. That's enough to make us start to drop altitude, and we start hitting the thicker atmosphere. And then it's the friction of the air against us that slows us up. We're heating up the atmosphere. By using our kinetic energy to heat the atmosphere, that slows us up from going 5 miles a second down to, ballpark of 400 feet a second. So here our final approach. We start to do our flare. We get to 1,800 feet. We drop our gear. They just come down by gravity. Here you see it coming down, and the air just pushes it down. There's no hydraulics, no nothing. It's just the weight of coming down. Saves us weight. And then come out and land. Now, when you come back, you're coming back dead stick. You don't have any throttle. So when you come back to land, you know you're going to land somewhere. You just hope you're going to land there. So I mean, you're worried about people with extra velocity coming in to be able to judge your last turn to come in. But there's no go around. You have to land. There's no choice. This is the first time the brakes really work. There's a disc brakes. They were carbon, similar to the ceramic brakes they have in sports cars today. They never lasted more than 0.8 landings without failing. They always broke, and you had to keep your brakes on. Once you put the brakes on, you only put more on, never off, or the starters would break, would jam the brakes, and they would lock up. So after this mission, or after the accident, we redid them, and then they worked okay. Now, if all goes well, you get your little hero picture at the end where you stand in front right before they go to your post-flight medical. But the thing I remember the most is we flew back to Houston, and we're walking in, and my wife had really habituated my kids, because you got to remember this was after the accident, and a lot of the guys had older kids, so it was a big thing. We're a small community. Everybody knows everybody, and here's kids going to school, and there's classmates, father's dead, they know their dad's going to go. So I mean, it's a real thing. So my kids, I had 2 girls at this time. She was not quite 2, and the other one's 4. And my wife would always bring her out to the field when we'd be coming back in our jets to meet us. And as soon as we shut the engine down, she would just let them down and let them run across the apron to be picked up. So here we are, we're coming out of the executive jet flying back. Here's my wife. We're coming in this red carpet. He's the commander. And my secretary's holding my daughter. And she was like, like a dog. Right? She's been conditioned when Dad gets out of the airplane, I can run out. And my secretary's holding her, and she is just squirming to beat the band. She wants to get down. And then my secretary Trudy, finally just laughs, and she just puts her down, and she just took off. So here she is, you see both feet in the air, and she's running out. And I remember that more than anything else. Her older sister, though, never let her forget it, because her older sister said, well, I behaved. I knew I was supposed to stand behind the rope. And I just stood there, and Kim got to run out and got her picture taken, and she was on the front page of the newspapers. And she goes, but I was the one that behaved. She's 38 now. She just said that again at Christmas when we were talking about it. And that was 34 years ago. So, all goes well, that's great. But now what are we doing now, in the future? So commercial space, and people have heard about it. I'll just talk briefly about this. So SpaceX certainly has flown a lot, but they've not always had everything going great, right? They've had some accidents, their fair share, but they're doing pretty well now. But that lets people know that space is dangerous. I mean, it's not like jumping in an airline. So bad things can happen. Now, you see them, advertising, Space Adventures, which does stuff with some of these different groups, including SpaceX. Live for 10 days in space. They charge like $20 million to go do it. So you can do it if you want to do it, and people do. Here you see Blue Origin's ad, right? They tell you this is what you're going to fly on, and they show you how it's going to work. There's Virgin Galactic, right? Here you see their plane and all, but it doesn't always work out well with them either, right? They had that accident not too long ago. And the point to say that this is, I still wonder from a adventure vacation, it's still risky. this is not like going to Disney World. And I just wonder, we'll see how it goes. If they end up having an accident with passengers, it might look a little different. I think people need to understand it's expensive, but if you kill a bunch of people paying $250,000 or more a pop, people might take a different view of it. But, so what are we doing? Beyond Earth orbit, this is like, we call it the tentacle octopus picture. There's a NASA one that shows back on Mars. But this is the new vehicle. They launched it not too long ago. You may have seen it in the news. The Orion is a capsule that looks very much like Apollo. It's actually larger. In fact, my wife was involved in the design of this. And what they'll be doing is they'll be launching in different cargo modes, how they're getting things up when they're going to Artemis, exploring the moon. And they'll go up, they'll put the gateway, which I'll show you in another slide, in orbit up around here. And then they'll go with the Orion to dock with it. So there's this gateway. The gateway would be there. And then they can always go there and use it as a way station based on it. Then go to the moon. But Orion would be what ferries them back and forth from Earth to the moon. And then, the hope is this is one of the lander designs, that they want to land on the moon by 27, 28, we'll see. I think it may be longer than that. But then they'll want to start actually practicing do what they call in situ resource utilization, where they understand how to actually make fuel. Actually, mostly they want to extract oxygen from from the soil. So if they're going to go to Mars, to take it all there with you would be prohibitive. You got to be able to use the resources that are there. So they'll use the moon. The thought is to use the moon as the kind of the lab to perfect those techniques, and then when you go to Mars, they'll be ready to do it. So there's still a lot of work to do. So we're going from our Earth orbit, ISS, learning there, to then ultimately go to Mars. Now they're saying now no earlier than about 2035, 2037. We'll see how that works. I can tell you, I was in charge of one of the big investigations by the National Academy back in '95, and we were looking at 2017. That didn't happen. So there really has to be a resolve to do it, and we'll see. I think for the kids, I think will definitely be in their life, and they could be of an age that if they actually became crew, they could go. I think for people a lot older than that, I don't think they'll be going there. I think they'll live to see it, but it will probably be certainly pushing 2040. So, with that, let's open to questions from you.